welcome. The space will be recorded, so if you guys have to leave for whatever reason, okay, he's going to try from his computer. Cool. You can tune back in later. We have a few things that we're going to discuss first. Like I said, before we bring up anybody as speakers, just because it gets a little bit chaotic and I don't want to be messing around with like requests and all that stuff. Although Garrison is requesting, so I will accept him. All right. So if you have to leave the space and you're not going to be able to stick around, but you have a question for him, you can DM me or put it in the purple pill, preferably, and just tag me so I can make sure that we ask him on the space. But otherwise, he and I just have a few things. We had a conversation recently and kind of discussed some stuff. So I have a few questions for him, and after that, I'll bring up some speakers and depending on his time, because again, it is 10 p.m. there, and we don't want to keep him too late because who knows how early he has to wake up at any point. So I recognize most of you guys in here. For anybody that doesn't know me or anybody listening on their PC or anonymously, I'm just your average American mom who happened to serve in the Peace Corps in Ukraine from 2010 to 2012. Very long story short, I have proudly raised over, I think, $118,000 for Ukraine aid since the full-scale invasion, and much of that is thanks to the support of a lot of you guys, not just the donations, but support on Twitter, with sharing and liking and just helping my reach with those posts. So thank you all very much for doing that and continuing to do that. It may not feel like it may not feel as important as it is because you're just on your phone or your computer, but it really is important. So thank you. That being said, we're going to be focusing our fundraising efforts today on our guest who and his team. So up in the nest, there's only 3 things in there right now. The middle post, the one that says, "Can you find the fella?" is a fundraising post. So if you guys can go ahead and interact with that, share it, do your thing, boost it. His team needs some help with some car repairs and night vision gear. They really are up in it, so they definitely need help at the front. And so any bit of love you can give that post, or $5, $10, $500, whatever you got, help him out. And he also has a buy me a coffee link in his profile. I think he has it, or I have it if it's not in there. I'll share that as well if you'd like to help him directly. So that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Garrison, or aka Frosty, his call sign. He's as a veteran of the United States Marine Corps with experience as an infantry rifleman and field radio operator. Garrison volunteered to join Ukraine in their fight against the invading Russian forces on April 1st, 2022. So I think it's really important and awesome for us to hear from people on the ground in Ukraine, especially those who are directly involved with the war. We hear mostly from volunteers, a lot of, people like myself or Ryan with Renegade Relief, or just there's a lot of volunteers. We don't as often have the opportunity to speak with actual soldiers. So I'm really glad that you're here, Garrison. And do you want to get started by just sharing why the hell you made the decision to go over to Ukraine to fight, and how did you do it? Like, how did you get started as far as where you went and all that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to check my audio real quick. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I decided to come over. I am a war historian, and I focus primarily on the French and Indian War, but we did a lot of research and stuff in the studies for the Great War and the World War. And for me, just kind of geopolitically, it's just sort of eerily similar, and I have a problem with that. The percentage of the human population that got killed in those wars was enormous, millions of people, and so in my mind, if you can stop it sooner rather than later, it kind of makes sense. It's sort of difficult to quantify how much sense it would make, right? Because we would never know the number otherwise. But I'm hoping that it kind of stays contained in Ukraine rather than cascading and then sort of spreading to either the rest of Eastern Europe or, other areas of the world as well. So that's kind of my primary concern and why I got involved. As far as how I got over here, I emptied my savings account and bought a bunch of gear and equipment and hopped on an airplane on April Fool's Day, which is a shit day to start a war. I just flew on over, and at the time, and I think I still do this, they were kind of collecting everybody, and there were sort of mild instructions on the internet, as obscure as they were, and just kind of went from there.
Awesome. That's definitely quite the decision to make, to just up it, to go all in, I guess. So good for you, and thank you for doing that. I'm always grateful for anyone who's volunteering, no matter what whether you're fighting or working on the humanitarian aid side or both. Because obviously it's played a huge, the volunteerism, both from Ukrainians and foreigners in Ukraine, has played a really significant part in this war. So thank you on behalf of the people that I care about over there for what you do. So I know that now you you can't talk too much about what you do now, but as far as just kind of your I'm going to let you pronounce it because I said it wrong, and I know you told me there was I was saying it the Russian way. Which kind of how you got started, what you can share as far as which group you got started with and how you've ended up with the group that you're with now.
Yeah. So I actually didn't really go to the Legion. I was at the Legion for a grand total of like not even 2 weeks. And then I ended up going to the 1st Special Purpose Brigade with the 518th Special Purpose Battalion. So I spent 2022 with them. They were an assault element. And then at the end of summer 2022, on the push into the Kharkiv region, there was the big spearhead into Balaklia, and they were the first unit to go in. They took a significant casualty rate. And by the end of 2022, the battalion I was with was more or less gone. And so I made the decision to, I had an invitation over to Gore, the main director of intelligence or defense intelligence of Ukraine. So I moved over to Gore, and I have been with them since.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there air raid alarms going on behind you, or is that just like wind? There's a creepy sound. It's not loud.
No, there's a refrigerator.
Okay. So I was like, oh, I thought I heard it, and I was like, oh, it's like an eerie sound. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad that that's it. Because I pulled up the air raid map, and because I usually have it up, and so I was like, I'll check it out and see if there's a lot going on. And I was thinking, no, the area I think you're in right now isn't under that. That's okay. All good. Just a fridge. False alarm. Cool. So we kind of talked about this the other day. There are a lot of, I'll put in quotes, air quotes, experts offering analysis on this war, both in the media and on Twitter, who fail to recognize the differences between Western militaries and the Ukrainian military. Can you tell me some of with your experience, what are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed between the two, both with regard to training or skill, as well as just general mentality?
Well, one of the things that's kind of significant right now is Ukrainian has a lot more conscripts in it, this year than it did in 2022. And, conscripts there's sort of motivation levels that sort of differ there. But I think that the biggest difference is kind of the funding and financing and the expectations that go with that. One of the things that really pisses me off is, in the US, there's a lot of people these days, especially from certain political elements going on about the amount of money that's been sent to Ukraine through Lend-Lease. And there's this expectation that, Ukraine's going to be able to behave like a military that gets nearly $1 trillion every year on, 140 or however much we sent, $140 billion that we sent over 2 years. And it's just sort of unrealistic. So you've got a obvious, element of the donor base is significant. The aid organizations are significant, and that's not something that like the United States military would ever have to rely on. If I was fighting this war under the U.S. military and I had a pair of night vision break, I'd just go to supply and get a new pair of night vision. But for us here, and this is true for both the foreign volunteer fighters and also the Ukrainian soldiers, we have to go through aid organizations because NATO sent a lot of that type of stuff in 2022, but they didn't really treat it as a consumable item. They treated it as kind of something that you would receive one time and then not need again, and that's just not realistic. Again, there's a lot of unrealistic expectations placed on the Ukrainian military, and they put a standard out there for these guys to match that it's not going to happen. I mean, they set them up to fail, I think, from a PR standpoint, because they'll say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And the Ukrainians sort of like throw their hands up, like, how the hell were we going to do that? So, I think for me as an individual, the biggest difference is the donor base, and then having to go through the aid organizations for things, whether it's vehicle repairs, whether it's night vision, whether it's drones, body armor, optics, everything. That's an enormous pain in the ass, to be quite honest with you. We're very appreciative of it, but I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't have to do that in the first place. If this was being done properly, there wouldn't be a need for aid organizations. You wouldn't have fundraisers and donors and all of this. I mean, the amount of private money that really is required to be sent over here by just, average whatever person back at home in the States or wherever else in the world is completely ridiculous. Like the whole thing with that really annoys the snot out of me. And I think that it annoys me because, I know how much, not exact numbers, but I know NATO as a whole, including the United States, is sitting on a whole lot of gear and equipment that probably they don't necessarily need, but because of the politics involved, a lot of that stuff can't be sent over. And so we're kind of stuck with our hands in our pockets, wondering what to do a lot of times. So I think that that's probably the biggest difference as far as the way their military behaved versus ours. But it's they're kind of in survival mode. Like they don't have a choice. There's nothing that they're doing wrong with that. It's just, it is how it is. I think it's fixable, but it's not up to Ukraine to fix it. It's up to everybody else, which kind of sucks. So.
Yeah, I know. And so you're seeing that from the soldier side, the military side of it. I'm seeing that same thing from the humanitarian side, being one of the people that you mentioned that is crowdfunding a fucking war. It's just unreal. And there's a lot of different things that go into it. That I don't have any military experience myself whatsoever. I have a background in logistics. So, I mean, the logistical side of things and issues there I can understand. But otherwise, as far as the military part, of course, I don't know. But just the fact that, I myself and organizations that I work with in Ukraine and everything, we're replacing helmets and things like that are, I'm blanking out on the word that you just used, but consumables, I think. And, especially when the size of their military has rapidly grown, like it is so much larger than before. Yeah, of course, giving them one thing, and especially when they go through helmets quickly, because if the helmet gets shot, or if there's phosphorus on it, or hit by shrapnel or whatever, then it has to be replaced, or it's not safe for them anymore. So they go through a lot of this stuff. And so to supply that many people in the first place is one thing, then to continue to resupply as they go has just been really challenging. So it's just kind of been, weapons aside, large weapons aside, that's just kind of unreal. But here we are, we're doing it. And speaking of which, if you guys would like to help Garrison and his team, the second tweet up in the nest, the "Can you find the fella?" tweet. First, go find the fella and in the picture, and then go help the team out if you can, or even just show the post some love, because they need some help with, as you guys know, all the usual stuff, car repairs and night vision, all that fun stuff. So you had mentioned to me previously that while some people, this goes, so I know you've mentioned that you've told me that you're a war historian. I don't know shit about war, except, well, now I know a lot about the Ukraine war, but besides this, a lot of people have compared this to World War I, but you said that it was more comparable to the Korean War. What have been, if you want to go more into that, or why, or like, what have been the biggest challenges about combat in Ukraine specifically, like compared to others, or your own experience?
Yeah, the thing that bothers me about this it's been this constant comparison to the Great War, and which is World War I. It annoys me because there's certain elements that are similar to an extent, but I mean, you can even look at just the pictures of the trenches that were dug in the Great War. Very, very, very different. What was in between the trenches from one side of the line to the other side of the line in the gray zone, very, very, very different. You didn't really have aircraft. The first drones were actually flown during World War I, believe it or not, but they were fly-by-wire. And so they didn't have a range because they were being controlled by a physical wire that ran to the ground. And so it's to me, it's not anything like World War I at all. I mean, we were still inventing the tank around this time. Like, it just wasn't that big of a deal. Most of the mines that existed, and you didn't have anti-personnel mines, you had anti-tank mines, because obviously when the tank got invented, it was very useful. And so to counter that, they invented the anti-tank mine, but they didn't have anti-personnel mines really. But then you fast forward to the Korean War, you've got a lot of aircraft involved. You've got shallower trenches. Yes, there's artillery and everything, but the line, isn't as contiguous as it was during the Great War. And now obviously you have the additional element of drones, which are, both useful and a nuisance. It's like everything in war is this weird double-edged sword that you just kind of have to learn to deal with and learn to adapt to. But to me, I don't, it's similar from a tactical standpoint to the Korean War, but I don't think we've really hit a realization yet that this is kind of a totally new type of war. And it's not just the drones. The drones are an element of it, because obviously you're not having to risk personnel. They can be used for various sorts of reconnaissance and surveillance. And then obviously you've got the FPVs and then the grenade droppers that, can actually have an offensive capability against whatever the enemy's doing. But this whole war is being run on radio signals. I had when I went in the Marine Corps, I just wanted to be infantry. They tried to push me into intel, and I said, no, just give me a rifle. And later on, there was this experiment that occurred that didn't work, but I got forcibly moved into radio operations, which I didn't really appreciate until I got here, but it's proved very useful. The thing is that this war has so many signals in it that it's just not really comparable to anything else, because obviously you have the radio signals that are going between the drone and the controller, but then you've got the regular communication signals. So I mean, you've got all of your command and control, all of the fire adjust for indirect fire, all of the positions talking to each other. I mean, everything is being run on signals. There's surveillance systems out there. They're using Wi-Fi. We've in the past hunted Russian snipers had bought. It's some sort of like cheap thermal optic that you can attach to a rifle, and you can't actually look through it. It uses Bluetooth to connect to your cell phone, and then you mount your cell phone to it. And we were hunting Russian snipers by, using radio direction finding to figure out their location from the Bluetooth signals they were using. So in my mind, this whole thing is really being fought in the radio spectrum. It's just because it's not seen, you can't take a picture of it. People are sort of missing that. And I think that's interesting because I feel personally like we're going to go through a period of warfare where that's going to be where the war is primarily waged. And I think that, unfortunately, we've placed such an emphasis on the other aspects involved in this war that we've totally missed that. And unfortunately, what that's translated to is that, Ukraine is receiving a lot of stuff, not as much as they were, obviously, because people are assholes back in my country, but they're not receiving a whole lot of electronic warfare equipment. So if it were up to me, I mean, the whole of NATO has enough electronic warfare equipment that they could actually, they could totally black out the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and the drones wouldn't be an issue, the comms wouldn't be an issue, the artillery wouldn't be able to do anything, because neither side can really use forward observers, simply because you can't really penetrate the line anywhere or get close enough to the line to be able to adjust fire correctly to where it's actually accurate. So if you shut down the radio spectrum, it more or less becomes just a regular old gunfight. And yeah, you lose a capability there, because if the enemy's drones can't fly, chances are yours can't either. But your average Ukrainian soldier is a much better gunfighter than your average Russian soldier. The Russian soldiers, people talk about the Ukrainians getting little training. By comparison to the Russians, they're getting an immense amount of training. It's when you start comparing them to, say, the United States that, yeah, there's more that they could do. But when you look at it just pound for pound, your average Ukrainian soldier is a much better gunfighter than your average Russian soldier. And so to me, rather than trying to continually match the Russian capability, I think it makes a lot more sense to focus on degrading their capability and then bringing it down to what Ukraine's strength is based upon what they actually have, rather than, constantly fighting this battle with Congress, and we need to find more artillery shells, and do we have enough 155 for ourselves to even send anything to Ukraine? So I would rather see a bigger emphasis placed on that war that's going on in the electromagnetic spectrum, simply because it makes it a lot easier to just go out and shoot stuff. And when it's just a gunfight, we smoke the Russians like you wouldn't believe. Like, it's almost a bad joke. And that's not arrogance. It's just reality. Like, they don't know what they're doing when it comes to just plain old rifle work, because they rely so much on the artillery. So that's
which makes it that much more freaking frustrating.
Yeah.
That the artillery, that being able to counter that, really could be the make it or break it. I thought that was really interesting when you told me that, when you mentioned that to me, that we're better at gunfighting, and interesting and infuriating. It's great. I'm glad to hear that, but also, so wow, they really are kicking ass. It really is just us not doing what we've promised over and over again. I think and I love when you go ahead.
It's partly that we're not doing what we promised, but it's also partly that, frankly, we've got a bunch of, I don't know what else to call them, armchair assholes that, they're former generals or whatever, and blah, blah. I did this during Desert Storm. And like, dude, I could give a shit. Like, not to go on a soapbox, but it's like they're looking at aspects that they want to look at rather than looking at it for what it is. And they're not seeing why it's different because they don't want to. Because then they get on the news on CNN and Fox or wherever the hell, probably not Fox these days, but they get on wherever and they start throwing these ideas out there, and it's like, it sounds good, but then you really think about what's going on. It's like, well, actually that doesn't make any sense at all. And so they continually pitch certain ideas, and they get picked up by politicians, and the politicians push the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are kind of in a position where it's like, well, we want more weapons. So it's like, do we comply and get more weapons, or do we, kind of do our own thing? And then it becomes a PR nightmare. Like, it's a whole really fucked up situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of leads into, you've kind of touched on a couple of the things for my next kind of topic, because it is a hot topic now, the Western weapons. Um, just a quick rundown. I'm sure a lot of the people listening here are at least somewhat familiar with the situation in DC, but for anybody who's not, the real short version is that in order to get the $60 billion aid package passed that we've been working on for months, we have to collect 218 signatures from members of the House of Representatives in order to pass to, I don't know what the word is, the verb, to pass, to enact a discharge petition, the discharge petition. Once we've reached that number, we can force the vote on the bill and finally make that bad boy a law and get the shit over there. So that's just wanted to point out. I do have something up in the nest, the one on the left, the post on the left. It says my rep sign has yours. I retweeted one of Cece, who's a listener in the space, which Garrison. She's fantastic. She's incredible with advocacy and getting people to call. She's played, honestly, a really important role. And she doesn't just, just on Twitter, but she actually goes and does this stuff in DC as well. So I'm very grateful for her. And I know a lot of people are. She has this resource with phone numbers. So definitely, you guys, if your representative is not signed on to that petition, freaking call them, go do whatever it takes. Let's get this done. And then and then go ahead and do do your thing there and boost our posts as well, so we can try to wrap this up, because I know you guys are tired of talking about it. I'm tired of talking about it. Let's get this shit passed and start getting that stuff moving over there. So Garrison, with regard to the weapons that you've seen or that you're aware of, I guess, or from the West, specifically from the US. What are your, I know one thing that I've heard from you, and as well as another American veteran who I'm friends with who's fighting over there. One of the biggest concerns is, like, you're not giving us the shit we're asking for. You're sending stuff, but you're not sending the stuff that we actually need. Do you want to elaborate on that, or do you have any other kind of comments as far as what's being sent over, the quantities, or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, I'll start off, like, going back to the ridiculous expectations. It came out in the news, and a lot of us had kind of heard this on the ground. It was rumors, but then it was eventually confirmed. I guess there were, how the Pentagon likes to go out and talk to Washington Post or New York Times or who the hell ever anonymously. And they had basically, they kind of picked at the Ukrainians because for the counteroffensive last year, they wanted them to concentrate their forces and do this combined arms maneuver. The problem is that in the year 2024, in order to effectively execute a combined arms maneuver, you need aircraft. And of course, Ukraine doesn't really have aircraft for, like, what I guess you could call the macro airspace. I think Ukraine really controls the micro airspace, right, with the drones. But the problem is obviously limited range, limited flight ceilings, payload capacity, things like that. And it was sort of obnoxious that they had this expectation, but at the same time, a lot of these same people were out in the news prior to saying, we don't think Ukraine needs, F-16s and JDAMs, which is silly to me because, it's like the HIMARS. The HIMARS gets a lot of credit for stuff, and I like it for what it is. It's useful for a lot of different things, but if we did an assault last year down south, and we had to go up to this bunker, and we're going to blow it up. And there were these two positions there, and between the two positions, they dropped something like 17 HIMARS on them. And it didn't do anything, because the thing about a HIMARS rocket is it's not a very big warhead that's on there. And with the bunkers the way they are, because they're so well reinforced with logs and various layers of dirt and whatnot on top, if it doesn't land directly on it, it's not going to do any damage to it. So we have various quote unquote precision guided munitions that, yeah, they're accurate to, maybe a meter, and that sounds great. But the difference between landing here or a meter to the left means you're not doing anything. And so we had to physically go up there and assault this position because we couldn't destroy it. So, I mean, as far as actual quantities of stuff right now, obviously artillery would help. I think more tanks would help as well. I mean, with the tanks specifically, you know, say for example, you send 200 tanks, it sounds like a lot, but you're talking about a front line that's something like what, 1,000 kilometers long. So, you know, 200 tanks spread out over 1,000 kilometers, you look at kind of a saturation level of these weapon systems, and, you know, on a piece of paper, it seems like a lot, but when you actually look at it from a per kilometer saturation, it's not very much at all. That's just, so I think sometimes we tell ourselves that we're sending a lot of stuff, but in reality, we're not. And until we actually take into account, again, the saturation of the things that we send, you know, in the context of the length of the line and what the line's doing, we're going to end up in these situations where you can send hundreds or thousands of whatever item or whatever system, but then when it actually gets on the ground, it's like you'll see one and you never see another one again because the next one's, you know, 10 clicks north of you or whatever. But that all comes down to ultimately kind of the amount of funds, I guess, that we ultimately allocate through Lend-Lease to Ukraine. And I do think that's, again, kind of tied to this ridiculous expectation that we have for the Ukrainians to behave like our military, which, you know, gets nearly $1 trillion every single year. And we have sent a fraction of that on an annual basis. It's all very frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah. Just a side note too. I always, when I'm trying to think about like with the comparison, not just the military, but where they're fighting, not necessarily with equipment wise, but this is also, we also just have to, anybody that's trying to look at things from their perspective, they're in their own country. They're in their own country that's smaller than the size of Texas, first of all, being attacked by one of the world's largest armies. They may not be one of the best armies, but they're a pretty big fucking army. And, you know, it's just entirely different. And like, you know, like you said, the expectations of them, just psychologically is just different than at least I can't speak for, I haven't served in the military here, but it's just different than being in a different, you know, when we've fought in the Middle East, for example. I did see somebody shared, I think it was George, here's George, who's in this space. He'll come up here in just a bit. Shared a post that Spain will additionally transfer 20 Leopard 2A4 tanks to Ukraine, which is awesome. But it's like, I've become kind of jaded. So now, like you were just saying, Garrison, I'm like, fucking 20? Of course we need it. That's great. But like, and it's not just Spain, because I know there's like limited numbers, but it's just, it's, you know, I think we've gotten so, at least in the US, for those of us who've been like pushing, like, come on, we got to send them something. We're excited for anything, but then it's like, okay, but now we need enough, you know, because that was the problem before. So we're just, you know, we're going to end up in the same spot over and over again, and that's not going to do anybody any good. Well, especially you being with it.
Yeah, I think part of that, we've gotten too used to patting ourselves on the back. And, you know, it's great when we send stuff. I'm not knocking sending things, but you have to send things that make sense. And part of what makes sense, you have to take into account the quantities. And, you know, it's just, if you send over 20 tanks, that's a good thing, right? Because it all adds up, right? Everything's a drop in the bucket, and I get that. But even when you look at the numbers as a whole, and you look at those numbers in the context of stuff, a tank is a consumable item just like ammunition, because eventually it's either going to get destroyed or it's going to break or whatever. Especially the tanks that have the mine clearing attachments. The mine clearing tanks, as well as they work, we didn't send over a lot of those. And so it's like, if that's kind of the primary vehicle that you have the expectation to sort of push with, right? Because that's got to lead the column in. Well, you know, if you only have a limited number of these, then you can only do a limited number of converging columns into an area to do whatever it is you're going to do. And So, I mean, again, we send this stuff over, it makes the news, and it's great from a PR standpoint. But
Hey, Garrison,
again,
are you there's something like moving near your microphone? Maybe there's
oh,
kind of like a I don't know if
what
you're
about now?
like wiggling.
No,
It's better now.
no. Well, it
Quit
might
wiggling.
be. I'm on my second cup of coffee. Um,
Sorry to keep you up so late.
um,
Thank you for being here. Sorry, go ahead. Go
that's
back.
okay.
Go on.
That's no problem. But yeah, I think we're just patting ourselves on the back too much, and I appreciate the PR aspect of it because I think it is good. You know, I think it does ultimately increase support in most cases. But we again, you have to look at everything with a realistic expectation to the line itself. And like you said, you know, Russia's military on a pound for pound basis, they suck, but they have a lot of stuff, and that's just reality. And you can have as many force multipliers as you want, but numbers still count for something. And the reality is that Russia has huge numbers. They have huge numbers of personnel. They have huge numbers of artillery. They have huge numbers of anything and everything related to, you know, being left over from the Cold War. They've got a lot of. We just sometimes don't take that into account and then create, again, unrealistic expectations for Ukraine. And of course, the Ukrainians get very frustrated with it. I speak to the Ukrainians all the time, and when they find out I'm from the United States, the conversation usually will go to, you know, what's going on in the U.S., like where the hell's our shit? And I don't really know what to tell them anymore because I don't really know the answer to it. I just know that there's politics involved, and it sucks, but you know, they're frustrated with us because, you know, we did have the 1994, we guaranteed their sovereignty, and we're just kind of not living up to that, and just it sucks. It really does. I think that this war probably realistically could have been won within the, you know, within 2022. In hindsight, it probably could have been entirely prevented had we lived up to our expectations in 2014, but you know, we didn't. So it is what it is. But yeah, that's just kind of what it is right now.
Yeah, it's so kind of looking back at that. I moved back to the U.S. from Ukraine in the November of 2012, and so there was already some stuff going on there. You know, it was after the Orange Revolution, but Yanukovych was the president, and he was crooked as hell, and there was just all sorts of stuff that like it it wasn't bad. Like the situation wasn't bad. There was I wouldn't call it civil unrest because they would have pulled Peace Corps volunteers if there was civil unrest in quotes. But it definitely it was hard to watch coming home and seeing, you know, when Maidan Revolution and all that stuff started happening. But yeah, I mean, none of this is like surprising. I mean, even when even leading up to the full scale invasion, I look back sometimes at messages between myself and Ukrainian friends, and you know, where we're talking about them lining up Russia lining up equipment along the border of Ukraine in Belarus and Russia. And when it got really scary was when for my Ukrainian friends that I was speaking to about it was when they said they were starting to stage mobile crematoriums, and so they were like, this is real. This isn't just a, you know, they're preparing to go in and because they didn't intend on bringing the bodies of their dead back. They wanted to just burn them on the spot so that they didn't have to admit to losing as many people. Of course, they didn't think they were going to lose this many because they thought they'd be done in 3 days, but. And that was for several months, you know, and we didn't take it seriously, we being the US and the West. So yeah, a lot of this is preventable, or at least could have been substantially mitigated at several different points in time. You know, even prior to Ukraine becoming an independent country, if we're going to go back that far. Fierce, we have a couple more things we're going to talk about, and then I'll bring up a couple of you guys to ask some questions. I just want to make sure that we get through because it is late in Ukraine. Garrison is over there now. For anybody joining, we are speaking to Garrison, or AKA Frosty, who is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who has been fighting over in Ukraine since April of 2022. We got in touch recently. Somebody put us in touch recently, mutual friends, and so we've been kind of talking and. one thing that, as you guys know, I do fundraising for a lot of quite a few frontline units, generally Ukrainian units. But I'm not just like set on that either. So, Garrison was saying that, as you guys know, it's been 2 years and they could use a little help as well. So I was happy to jump on it and to help out. So if you if you can, the middle tweet in the nest up top has the fundraiser information. Thanks to Protect a Volunteer, which I need to find out more information on them, but Protect a Volunteer set up a fundraiser on their PayPal. They're an actual charity organization. So you can donate to his group, help them with car repairs and night vision. If you can't donate, because as I know very well, you guys are, a lot of you that are here are always doing as much as you can. So if you can't today, great. Just go ahead and save it for later or retweet it or send it to your friends and show us some love. And we would really appreciate that. Yeah. So one thing that I thought was interesting, Garrison, was how much you've been able to interact with Ukrainians and learn about their culture. That was when we have talked before. I wanted to hear more about that because as an American living in Ukraine in the past, I just like to hear about the experiences of other Americans doing the same. I was also very proud to hear that you can speak a little Ukrainian because that is difficult. So good job on that.
I speak trench Ukrainian. It's not real Ukrainian. It's just enough to keep my ass alive.
Hey, that's something. That's more than a lot of Americans, that most Americans can say. So you probably know some Ukrainian words I don't know because I'm not sure I do know the words that would be needed in a trench. I guess like get down or like move maybe.
Yeah, but I can barely order a cup of coffee, so
right. Well, you're all right. You're still there. You're surviving. I'm sure the social aspect is enjoyable in itself, but connecting with the people that you're fighting alongside and trying to save probably gives you even more purpose for being there. What are some of your, if you want to share like one or two of your like favorite experiences with Ukrainians, like away from the battlefield, and then kind of if there's anything that surprised you most about their culture or food or anything like that, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. So most of my interaction with Ukrainians actually occurred in 2022. When I went over to that special purpose battalion for the first 6 weeks, I was the only foreigner there. There was a separate battalion underneath the brigade that was entirely comprised of foreigners. But what became the 518th was intended to be entirely Ukrainian. And it just so happened that I ran into the commander, and he invited me over, and I just decided to stay. And so while I was there, I think there were 3 guys there that spoke English. So I was very, very exposed to just Ukrainians, and it's always kind of amazing because the people that are very heavily pro-Russian or very anti-Ukrainian, they try to make Ukrainians out to be this certain way, and I know this because for all of you listening, my dad is one of the QAnon guys, so I hear shit about Ukrainians constantly. And it's actually fun for me because at this point I just fuck with them about it. So it's become a bit of a pastime. But the Ukrainians it's a bunch of people from Iowa, and I don't know how else to say it. I mean, their culture, their kind of personality, just even the way like their humor is. It's like any flyover state in the United States. I mean, at the end of the day, you see a lot of pictures of Kyiv and all this, but most of Ukraine, I mean, it's kind of sort of poorer farmers and stuff, and it's just like they're great people. I mean, you'll be sitting down in a bunker or a trench or whatever, and they're still down there trying to stuff your face full of food. And I love them to death for it. I don't eat as much as maybe they want me to. It's like, here, try this, try this. Oh, you're an American. Here, you need some more borscht. And I love borscht. Borscht is one of my favorite foods now. If I never see buckwheat again, I'd be okay. But yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of people from Iowa, and it sort of kind of annoys me because I feel like a lot of times there's a significant lack of support for Ukraine coming from, again, what we refer to as flyover states. But if they were to just come here and meet the people, I mean, they're the same. They just don't speak the same language. But culturally speaking, I mean, it's nearly identical, which I think is great. But I don't really understand why that doesn't get as much attention. I think sometimes we focus too much on the city side rather than on the farmers. A lot of the guys that were in that special purpose battalion, they came from in and around Kyiv, but a lot of them were from the countrysides around Kyiv. A lot of them were from the countryside around Kryvyi Rih. And that was kind of the life they knew. I mean, they were volunteers that had come from farm communities. And so, I mean, to me, it doesn't feel much different than America. Like, it's just not, I don't know. Sometimes Ukrainians get made out. It's mostly the pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian side, but they get made out like they're just this totally different group of people, and they're just not. I mean, our humor is basically the same as theirs. They laugh at stuff. They understand sarcasm very well. They love it. They love the joke. So, that's kind of the best aspects of the Ukrainians that I love is just getting to sit there and have my face stuffed full of food and just sitting around telling jokes.
That hospitality, you'd mentioned that before. And I was saying that's always when I've described Ukrainians in the past. I mean, since I lived there, it's always been they're the most hospitable people that I've ever met in the world. So I do take a little personal offense that you compared them to people in Iowa, as I'm a Kansan, and you could have used me as a much better example. But in fact, Ukraine does it. So I lived right in the center of Ukraine, and I live right in the center of the U.S., and it looks really similar. I'm in the suburbs of Kansas City, but the farms and things like that. Once you get out of the burbs and you head a little west in Kansas, it looks just like central and parts of west or eastern Ukraine. And what's crazy though is there are still a lot of, and this is, I mean, I actually hadn't really gone east of the river, of the Dnieper River, which runs down the center of the country. I hadn't gone really far past that at all until last year when I was there. And I went out to the front last year, and so we were driving through these fields that are just stunning, just like rolling fucking meadows and just beautiful, beautiful minefields, just probably full of mines, but they were gorgeous. But there's still so much open land, and I'm tying this back to what you're saying about focusing on the city. A lot of people, and I've tried to emphasize that before. A lot of the images that we see are in cities. A lot of, we tend to focus on that. Whereas I think it's about 40% of the population of Ukraine, which is still somewhere around, even after the war, like the full invasion, is still around 40 million people. Around 40% of that live in rural communities. And so again, we're talking about a country that's smaller than the size of Texas. That's 40% rural, that still has plenty of open fields and space. It's hard to, until you see it, it's hard to kind of see the villages. And where I lived in a very poor agricultural village. So I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I try to think about that, or try to explain that a little bit. That it really is. And then, if you think about the people that were able to leave the country, or, evacuate Ukraine, I would assume, or generally had the means to do so. whereas a lot of the people in the villages wouldn't. So you're going to be left with more of those, higher percentage of the people staying around in the rural communities as well. If anybody listening is not already following Garrison, please go up and give him a follow on his account. He's going to be joining us on some more spaces coming up. We've got something that we are potentially in the works on with some other soldiers, kind of a more of a podcast style situation. But I think it'll be if and when we can make that happen. As you guys know, with war, who the hell knows? It's a plan, but we'll see. And then he's also going to be joining us on some of the Letters from Ukraine spaces coming up, which is something that I help co-host with Furious George and David Brookfield on Mondays at 4. Oh gosh, there's so many numbers in my head now. 4 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, so really looking forward to speaking with you more. I have just like one or two more things, and then we'll go ahead and if any of you guys do have questions, I'll start to bring some of you up as speakers so you can have an opportunity to ask some questions if you'd like. Garrison, are you doing all right? You're hanging in there?
Yeah, I'm good. I think the second cups of coffee is kicking in. So yeah, I'm good.
Okay, great. Hell yeah, let's go. So kind of on that, on the mines, I unintentionally, like accidentally leading into my next question, which is great. We've heard about the ridiculous number of mines that have been littered throughout Ukraine by the enemy. One thing that you mentioned to me before, and I found interesting, was that they often drop them along the tree lines because that's where soldiers often set up camp or take cover. How have mines affected maneuverability for your team and just the war in general?
It affects it a lot. I mean, when you get out into the open fields, most of what's out there are anti-tank mines. The anti-tank mines, if you step on one, it's kind of 50-50 whether it's going to go off. They have a certain, poundage or kilograms that it needs to actually trigger it. But a lot of the mines are so old that a lot of those triggers have been degraded. So you can actually potentially set those off by stepping on them. But we tend not to go through the fields unless it's like an armored assault. And so those are more of a threat to the vehicles themselves. The anti-personnel mines are usually right outside the tree lines because that's where, they have the ability to physically put them. You can't just run into an open field and set a PMN mine down. So you'll see a lot of PMN 3s and a PMN 4. There's a lot of PMN 4s sitting on, in these areas that can be potentially used as approach paths to the positions. And it kind of sucks because you're sort of forced into this kind of decision-making process where you have to decide, are we going, through the center of the tree line where we have more concealment and potentially more cover, even though at this point, a lot of them are wrecked because of the artillery and it's a pain in the ass, or are we going to go on the outside of the tree line where we've got, a little bit more maneuverability. Inside the tree lines, you'll have a lot of booby traps, not as much as there used to be, but there'll be Mon 50s in there, which is like a claymore and all sorts of other stuff. But then on the outside, I mean, yeah, there's just PMN 4s everywhere. And so what happens is you end up in this situation where a lot of these movement to contact formations that we use in, the sort of grander NATO military space, you just can't use in Ukraine. Typically, we're only moving in files, and the Russians do the same thing. But when it comes to mines itself, you've got to have somebody up in the front that knows how to, clear the mine or render it safe or whatever. And so you end up in this weird situation where it's like you might have 30 guys on an assault, but realistically, you've only got 3 or 4 rifles actually pointed at the enemy position because that's as many as you can get down there without putting everybody else in danger by walking through, a separate set of mines off what we would refer to as the proven route, while the sapper's up there in the front on his belly trying to, disarm this stuff. So yeah, the mines greatly affect everything. I mean, if there weren't mines, honestly, we could take positions a lot easier because we'd be able to do things like bounding. We'd be able to do more flanking maneuvers. And a lot of times, especially once you've taken contact, you have to take this sort of calculated risk where it's like, I need to move over there so I can shoot this dude, or he's going to smoke me and all my buddies. But if I do that, there's a really good chance I'm going to step on something that's going to blow my fucking leg off. And a lot of times, you're just kind of running through areas sort of blind because you don't have the time to look down at your feet. You do the best that you can. But they're everywhere. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if like 100 years from now, they're still finding mines all over the place, to be honest. And then, of course, you've got other types of mines as well. We've got the little butterflies, which I can never remember the actual proper name of, but they're the ones that come out of the, I think it's called a cassette, but it's like a container that goes into an artillery shell and basically explodes in an airburst and spreads these things out all over the place. And they can't be disarmed. And it looks like it's got these wings on it, which is why we call it a butterfly, but it almost looks like a leaf. Especially in summer and spring and everything, when you have all the vegetation everywhere. So they're very difficult to spot in the first place. And if you go anywhere near them, they're not going to kill you, but they'll maim you enough that you need to be evacuated depending on how far away you are from when it explodes. So it's a bit of a nightmare to deal with those. It's not as scary as, say, getting slammed with artillery, but anytime that we go up to a position, we try to fly drones over top to see as many mines as we can. But each season you go through makes it, it has their own challenges depending on the season. So like in wintertime, the mine's already down there and it's covered in snow. You're not going to see it. And then you get into spring and summer and it's like the vegetation's too high and you're not going to see it. So we do our best to try to spot stuff, but a lot of times we just can't, which is why you do have a lot of these injuries. You can go out and look at, injured Ukrainian soldiers and they're missing arms and legs and everything else. And a lot of that's, mines. It's not just mines. There's artillery as well, but a lot of that's mines because you just can't do anything about it a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think those butterfly mines too, which I think the translation is like petals. I think when my friends have mentioned them, I had a friend, unfortunately, very recently step on one and lose his foot. So they're not large enough to really, I mean, they could kill a kid that picks it up, but I think they're also made out of like plastic so that normal like metal detectors that can't be used to detect those, which is also.
Yeah, that was something that the Soviets did because they were concerned that if they did get into a war with NATO or the United States, that we'd go in there with a bunch of, metal detectors and find all their mines. So they began producing mines out of plastic, which is actually a good idea because it's cheaper, more cost effective. It's actually easier to make them. So they were able to produce this mass quantity of plastic mines. But some of these things are a pain in the ass to find. And of course, anywhere near the front line, it's difficult to use a metal detector anyway, because there's so much shrapnel everywhere that you put the thing on the dirt and it's going to go off. So yeah, the plastic in the mines is utter pain in the ass.
Yeah, and it's just another way that Russia is coming up with the worst ways to hurt people. And I believe it was in Afghanistan that they were painting them to look like actual butterflies so kids would pick them up. Anyway, if I've got one more question for you. I had somebody, actually, just kidding. I had somebody message me a question really quickly first here. We are doing, there's a fundraiser that was set up by Protect a Volunteer for Garrison's group. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, Phalanx group?
That's correct.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, don't mispronounce that because
okay.
You did the other day and made it sound like a bunch of giant penises.
I Googled it and I corrected myself. And so we cleared that up. Hey, I don't know, got a bunch of guys out at war come up with things and I wasn't going to judge. So yeah, they're Protective Volunteers set up a fundraising option on their PayPal page, and there's a link to it on the middle tweet in the nest. When the Can You Spot the Fella tweet, and you make sure that you, on the drop-down menu, click on Frosty, which is Garrison's call sign, and you can help them out. They have a lot of things that they need help with, just like all the, you guys see the list when I share them. There's just constantly, like we were saying, the consumables, just things that they go through, whether it's regular wear and tear or something gets blown up or they get hit and it's no longer effective, like a helmet or vest or plates. So I kind of forced him to pick a couple to focus on. So they have a few cars that I don't know, Garrison, and I don't know how many. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 that you had mentioned, like cars that need repairs, and then general night vision, because I know that you guys also, a lot of that stuff is also coming from fundraising and or out of your own pocket, which is crazy. But so if you guys can help with that, we can narrow it down and get some more details for you. Like I said, though, I kind of just made him pick a couple things to focus on. So that's up there. If you guys can help out, that'd be great, or just help boost the post. He's going to be on some more spaces with myself and with some of the other space hosts that I work with sometimes as well. So, and then give him a follow as well. So the question in my DMs was just clarifying. Did you say that you saw 17 HIMARS sent to a Russian hilltop that didn't work? And did you eventually take that from them? I know you said you did something on foot after.
So it wasn't a hilltop, but yeah, it was these 2 Russian positions. And basically as accurate as they are on paper, when they're shot at the positions, because it's so well entrenched, if it doesn't land directly on it, it doesn't do anything. And so between the 2 positions, they shot 17 of them, and it just isn't going to do anything to the bunker unless you actually hit directly on the bunker. I think the HIMARS is good for precision striking things like, ammunition caches and things like that. But it's, to take out these trenches and shit, it's just not going to work. And so we did have to go up there. We went up to that position twice and were pushed back both times. In fact, the first time we went up there, we got up to the position and the Russians had seen us on one of their drones. We think the Ukrainians kind of knew which drone it was, and it was turning around to go change its battery out or whatever. And they just happened to spot us, and they waited until we got in the middle of the minefield that was in front of the position. And then those 2 positions opened up on us. There was a tree line, like 400 meters, 500 meters south of it, that opened up on us as well. And then they started hitting us with airbursts and AGS and all this other shit. So we got pushed back from there. And then finally, I think a week or 2 later, the Ukrainians went down to that position in an armored assault, and we're finally able to take it. But yeah, the HIMARS they're good for what it's intended to do, but the actual warhead is just too small. It's not a very big warhead. It's very, very, very small. The rocket itself is large, but the warhead, the part that goes boom, isn't big enough to take out these positions, because they're just too well fortified. I mean, the way a bunker is constructed, and both sides are doing this because both sides started doing this at Donbass, and they've gotten honestly very, very good at it. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians. I mean, it's not just a hole in the ground with some sticks on top. I mean, you've got, usually 2 layers of very thick logs, and then 2 or 3 layers of sandbags filled with dirt sitting on top. So in order to penetrate that, I mean, it's rudimentary. It's not like it's concrete, but at the same time, it's thick enough that, these tiny little warheads on the HIMARS, they're just not big enough. They need to be blowing these things up with JDAMs, but obviously that requires jets and JDAMs, which they don't have. So yeah, they're just not accurate enough, and they're just too small.
That's wild. Which especially because, and I don't know anything about weapons except for what I hear people talk about on here, but I know everybody's been really wooded up about HIMARS for a long time. So it's I think it's maybe a little bit surprising to hear that for some of us, including myself.
Yeah, I mean, it worked really well in 2022, because I noticed when one of the first ones that came in went down into Kherson. And we were down there at the time, and it was noticeable. because as soon as it got down there, the Russians had kind of aggregated all of their artillery ammunition in certain spots because they weren't worried about it getting blown up. And so it was really, really easy to pick it off. And when we did that, we really screwed them up because they were not expecting that to be an issue, and they hadn't decentralized their ammunition. Well, now all that's decentralized. Like every now and then you'll see video of, some sort of artillery shell storage area that gets hit, and, big boom, everything's great, but it's a lot more decentralized now than it was in 2022. It's great for stuff like that. But when you have to absolutely land dead center on something, I mean, again, on paper, if it's within 3 meters, it sounds great, but 3 meters is the difference between destroying the target or missing the target in the case of things like bunkers or taking out firing positions, stuff like that. So if it had a larger warhead on it, that would be great. But larger warheads mean larger rockets, and larger rockets need larger vehicles. And so it's a whole deal.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, last question for me. It's a quick one, and then we'll start to go to hands. And so if anybody else wants to come up as a speaker, has a question, if you're not comfortable asking questions, you can shoot me DM or put it in the purple pill. I'll try to make sure that I catch that as well, and so we can have Garrison, aka Frosty, answer your questions for you. So my last one for you is if you could tell the West, the collective West, anything, if you had one message to share with the collective West, being an American veteran fighting in Ukraine for almost 2 years now, what would it be?
Get your collective shit together. No, what I would tell them is you need to understand that if you're really in this war, you're part of the logistics supply line, and you really need to understand that and take that to heart. Because as much as I love doing rifle work, I'm an infantryman at heart, and I will always be. Riflemen do not win wars, logistics win wars. And I think the biggest hindrance to the Ukrainian military has been that their logistics supply is totally screwed up. But they don't have the ability to fix that by themselves. They need us to, because we're the ones that have said that we will, provide these munitions and everything else. So you have to look at yourself as part of that logistics, and you need to understand that when the turnaround time between when a certain weapon system or a certain number of shells gets talked about to the time it reaches the front line, it's just too long, because we see stuff in the news, for example, the $60 billion. I mean, even if that had been debated on for just a month and been passed, that would have been great, a lot better than what we're in right now. But once it's passed, it's got to be, sort of sorted and then loaded onto whatever, whether it's a boat or an aircraft, and then, get to where it needs to go. And then it's got to be separated and sent to different units. And so it may seem like once you pass it, it's a done deal, but there's a period of time of several months between when that stuff gets passed and when it actually makes it to the front line. So I think that if we're going to really help Ukraine, we've got to stop being a hindrance to that logistics and get them the stuff as fast as we possibly can. And we've got to stop it with dragging our feet.
Preach, man. Yeah. The logistics stuff. That's my shit. Speaking of shit, thank you for sharing that. No, that wasn't shit. That's not what I meant. Thank you for sharing that. I just thought it was funny because some of my friends are in here, and when Garrison and I were talking a couple days ago, and he asked me what about swearing, like just making sure we're on the same page about stuff, and I kind of laughed because as many of you know, I have a potty mouth, so I said there is no filter, and you are a soldier fighting in Ukraine. You can say whatever the hell you want. It is your space. So
it's part of the lexicon.
So let her. Right. All right, so we're gonna go to hands now. Just keep in mind, guys, it is 11:15 p.m. there, so we'll hang out for a little while longer. So try to keep your questions as kind of succinct as possible, just so we can make sure that everybody has a chance. If you don't get a chance to ask a question or talk to him today, he's going to be hanging out on more spaces with us and myself in the future. So yeah, so you'll have a chance to talk at some point. Fierce, you can go ahead first.
Well, thank you, Paige, and thank you, Frosty, for everything you're doing and everything you're bringing to us. Uh, yeah, Paige asked about the minefields and all that kind of stuff, but my question actually was it, and I bet she didn't have time to fully read my question that I sent to her, is how the experience of American soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, compares to the experience on the stupid long 1,000-mile front lines in Ukraine. How is that experience different, or how you would evaluate that experience?
I I don't know that there's a whole lot of overlap, to be honest. The thing with Iraq and Afghanistan, as an example, is it was mostly IEDs, and an IED is a cool military term, but what it really means is a homemade mine, because that's what they are. The thing is that as many as there were throughout the country, so we heard about all the time, the actual concentration level of those IEDs was nothing compared to the concentration level of these mines. And the mine concentration kind of varies depending on not just which minefield you're in, but which part of the minefield you're in. Some minefields you can walk through and not even know you're in a minefield until somebody gets blown up. That happens a lot. But then other minefields is like, going into it, like we're about to walk into a minefield because there's just so many there. The other thing too is because there's so many of them, the Russians just kind of plaster them everywhere. A lot of times they don't bother burying them and they don't bother hiding them because they don't have to, because when you have such a large quantity out there, it doesn't really give you any additional benefit to bury them. And honestly, they don't really have the opportunity to do so, because if they leave their position to go out there and bury the stuff, usually they'll just, get schwacked before they have the opportunity to bury it. So they kind of run out there, set the stuff as quick as they can, and then run back to the bunker or trench, wherever they came from. So I don't know. I think that the biggest overlap is less to do with the tactics side and more to do with the medical side. The injuries themselves are very similar. So I think a lot of the kind of field trauma care that we learned in Iraq and Afghanistan carries over quite a bit. But on the tactical side, it's totally different. The other thing too is that it's a lot more consistent that they explode. Yeah, every now and then you saw I stepped on a mine and it didn't go off. Not me, I've never had that happen, but I've heard stories of it. Iraq and Afghanistan, though, there's a lot of stories of there was an IED, it was intended to work a particular way, and it just didn't. But an IED being made in someone's living room is very different than a mine that's being professionally manufactured in a factory. So there's a lot more consistency with the kind of results that it gives. So yeah, I see a lot of carryover from the trauma side, but I don't think there's a whole lot on the tactics side that's very similar, to be honest.
Very interesting. Thank you. George, go ahead. Oh, and before you
Hey,
go, George, Garrison, George is one of the other guys that I do the space with, the Letters from Ukraine space. He's one of the co-hosts, so you'll get to know George and be speaking with him more. He's an awesome dude, and so I'm just introducing you right now before you go ahead with your question, George.
thank you. Thanks for that, Garrison. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming on and letting Paige interview you. But I want to thank you for my wife's Ukrainian. We have family, obviously, in Ukraine, and as on a personal note, I'd like to thank you for what you're doing for them. I mean, that's a debt that that's never going to go repaid. So I just want to say before I talk to you, thank you for that. Really much appreciated. So I find it so I used to be just George, and I changed my name to Furious after the offensive, or the so-called offensive that the Ukrainians attempted, and it became Furious because when they were discussing the offensive really quick, and you mentioned that look, they didn't have air power, but I thought the most damning thing when it comes to the Allies was we sent them 54 Bradleys. Garrison, I know, I don't know what area you're fighting in, but I guarantee you, if you had 4 or 5 Bradleys assigned to your area, you'd be in a different situation. We have thousands of them, and we sent 54. And I'm with you. We've done an absolute horrific job. The United States of fucking America sent 31 Abrams. I know you were a prior Marine, right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, so yeah, I'm prior Army, and yeah, you mentioned Desert Storm, and you can't compare it because in Desert Storm, First Armored Division. I mean, just the absolute firepower that if First Armored Division from Desert Storm was in Ukraine, this war would have been over because of the firepower we could bring. And you mentioned MLRS, and that's another bone in my contention is we've given them what you're talking about, the unitary warheads. We haven't sent them any of the cluster munitions. Now there are allies of ours that still have the old M26 rockets. The ones that if you remember back. I know you're younger than me, but I'm sure you've seen it even on documentaries. MLRS used to be able to erase a whole fucking grid square. And we haven't gone out to our allies to purchase those. It's like to me, and you'll meet the other couple of the other gentlemen, but David Brookfield is also he's a British Army veteran, engineer, and we've always decried that. It seems like our allies have given Ukraine just enough to keep them in the fight, not to win. And when you tell me that, the supply thing, right? I don't know if do you guys in the Marines, did you guys have HEMTT trucks? You remember the HEMTT trucks?
I'm having trouble hearing that. The which truck?
It was called a HEMTT. It was like the M10 something. It was like it kind of looked like it had like a wedge shape in the front, and you could load all kinds of stuff on the back of it. It was pretty long. It had like 4 axles, 8 wheels.
Yeah. Okay. I just looked. Yes, we did.
Yeah. Why haven't we sent you guys 5,000 to 6,000 of those? Those would help the logistics, right?
Yeah. Like this is.
I'm sitting there crowdfunding SUVs for you guys. Why? And that's a question. That's the question that seriously the Ukrainian government needs to start asking its allies. Why do I have to have the general public crowdfund SUVs for my soldiers?
I think. I think
just,
one of the problems Ukraine has with even asking that question, though, is when they pose it. Not that this is fair to them at all. It's not. But they pose that question, and then you've got certain people that I'm not going to name that go out there and it's like, oh, they're unappreciative of what we've sent them. And it's just like, they're not unappreciative of what you sent them. It's like, they're just wondering why we haven't sent, like you said, enough to actually win the war. It's like, it's enough to stay in the fight, but it's not enough to actually push and win. And the whole thing comes down to concentration levels and saturation of the line. And, like you're saying with the Bradleys and the tanks and everything else, it's all, to me, it's gotten too self-congratulatory. We pat ourselves on the back and say, look, we did a good job. But the reality is, you look at it in the context of the line, in the context of the combat, and it's practically nothing. You're not going to be able to do anything with tanks if your tank concentration is 1 tank every 5 kilometers. It's not going to happen, because the tank can't be out there by itself. You're going to have it sitting in groups. So now you've got groups sitting, you might have a group of tanks sitting, one group every 20 or 30 kilometers. What are you going to do with that? Like, it's just not enough stuff. And I think if we start to just do some very basic math on it, it becomes incredibly obvious that it's not enough stuff. But, try telling that to the politicians in DC and whoever the hell else is making decisions. But yeah, I mean, for the Ukrainians to turn around and criticize their allies, there has been a couple of instances where they've tried to do that. And every time they get beat up for it. I mean, Zelensky has taken, publicly some pretty ridiculous hits, particularly from the segment of America that is not interested in helping Ukraine at all. He takes some pretty big PR hits for being, in their mind, unappreciative of what's being sent. And again, he's not unappreciative. He just wants what he wants. It's like asking your friend to pick you up KFC and they come back with Pizza Hut, and no, well, I brought you food. Why are you upset? It's like, well, because I asked you for Kentucky Fried Chicken and you said that you'd get it. It's just, it's kind of ridiculous that we expect them to be thankful of stuff, because I think that they are thankful. I'm not saying it's ridiculous for them or for us to expect them to be thankful in general, but that doesn't somehow remove our responsibility in actually understanding the situation.
Exactly. Thank you. Our responsibility. So I am going to pose this to you. You don't have to answer now, but one of the ideas we need to float is to actually have people like you that are in Ukraine or have been in Ukraine actually doing the fighting, and have set up a meeting where you can actually do like an audio meeting with some of the representatives in our Congress, so that they can hear firsthand from someone that's been, obviously served in the U.S. military and Army, Navy, what have you, Marines, and say, hey, I know, I understand what you guys are saying this, but I'm just telling you, or we're just telling you as a group, this is what we need. And if you don't believe us, then maybe you need to send some of your quote unquote advisors here to the front and see for themselves what we're dealing with.
So if I could actually just comment on that, we actually do, to an extent. Some of us, handfuls of us, are in touch with various representatives. I don't know if I'm allowed to say who, so I won't.
No, don't.
But yeah, I mean, I've been to DC and met with a number of representatives there, as well as some other organizations under the U.S. government. And the problem is that because typically when we go and talk to representatives, we're talking to the ones that are already supportive of Ukraine, and they acknowledge what we're saying, they understand what we're saying, they agree with what we're saying, but then they're constantly hitting this political wall where a huge segment of the country is very supportive of Ukraine, yet we're all kind of being held hostage in a way, because there's a certain segment of the population that is just large enough to hold everything up. And I think for the representatives, at least from talking to the ones that I've spoken to, they get very frustrated because they do want to help, but just because of the way politics work, their hands get tied, which is very, very, very unfortunate. But, that's just, I guess, kind of, for lack of a better term, that's just the game,
Yeah.
No,
That.
I was going to say, unfortunately, that's part of the problem. But when you guys, so just really quick, when you need something like desperate and you need to get it into the hands of your unit, obviously you reach out to Paige, reach out to me, and we will try to get a stat fundraiser going for you guys. And sometimes we were pretty successful in getting stuff done.
Yeah, I absolutely will. That's again the thing. The strangest thing to me is that we have to use donors in the first place, but at the same time, if we didn't have the donor base, we'd be screwed. I mean, it would blow people's mind if they knew how much of the equipment that we use on a literal daily basis is coming from just average people, not in Ukraine, back at home or whatever. And we absolutely do whatever we can to get that support, because without the support, we a lot of times literally can't fight, or we can't fight most effectively and do what it is that we need to do in whatever specific situation. So yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with George. As far as the representatives go, I've heard the similar stuff in DC with meeting with some House representatives, and they'll say like, well, actually, we, in the background, Representative such and so has worked on this project with Ukraine and helped with this with Ukraine, but their constituents don't agree, so they can't vote for it or something. And it's like, oh my God, like I understand it's their job to, it's just hard to like have somebody look you in the eyes and tell you that, especially when this is just so right versus wrong, good versus evil. And I forgot the other thing I was going to say. So go ahead, Brian. And yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you're next. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, first of all, Garrison, appreciate everything that you're doing over there. Thank you so much for doing it. Uh, talk to me about your loadout. In particular, I'm interested in like things like just boots and uniforms and helmets and chest plates and stuff. I mean, do you, with your unit, your experience, are those things um, generally at hand when you need them, or are you always constantly kind of scrounging? Or help me understand like your basics, the real basic stuff, um, independent of weapons and ammunition. Just like I said, the things that I described. You feel like you're adequately supplied more often than not.
As far as that stuff goes, no, we're not adequately supplied. They sent a lot of stuff in 2022, and it came from all over the place. I remember when I showed up in April, the first plate carrier I received was, I think, from Turkey, but it was for some sort of like static gunner position, on a naval vessel. So it was this big, bulky, bright blue thing that was just never going to work in the infantry, but that's what was sent over. At this point, nearly all of us, and this is true not just for the foreign volunteers, but for the Ukrainian soldiers as well, we purchase and own most of our kit. In the U.S. military, obviously, you get to a unit and you get issued something, and then everything's sort of standardized. Here, we're relying on companies like MTAC. MTAC's great. I absolutely love MTAC, but a litany of other companies as well, and we all kind of just own our stuff, which isn't terrible other than the financial aspect and the standardization. So like instead of having everyone's IFAC sitting in the same spot, they're sitting all over the place, and we mark them with tape. And we do that because not everybody has the same IFAC, and not everybody has the same kit loadout and the gear loadout and everything. 2 years in, now I own everything. But when I came over in 2022, I couldn't afford to buy all of my own stuff. So we're well equipped as far as our individual kit is concerned, but that's only because we've spent either so much of our own money or been able to fundraise that on the internet. That's something that like NAFO has been a big part of in helping us, as well as the various aid organizations and people like Paige in getting. But as far as getting that stuff from governments, it's just not. It's like they sent it over one time. It's like the U.S. sent a whole bunch of SAPI plates or ESAPIs, which is a very, very, very good armor plate because it's very lightweight. It's very strong. It's been tested. You can trust it and rely on it. They sent a whole bunch of those in 2022. I have not seen those since. I can't get them anywhere. Nobody knows where they are. The plates that I run are actually now manufactured in Ukraine, and they're great plates. I haven't any problems with them. Other people run them, and they work just fine. I've seen the damaged plates where they stopped around, so they're good plates. But I had to go out and purchase those myself. So yeah, we're kitted out, but a lot of times you'll see the pictures of soldiers wearing the gear. They own that uniform and that helmet and those, magazine pouches and plate carriers and plates and boots. Like that's stuff that they're buying. And this isn't just the foreign volunteer fighters. This is most of the Ukrainian units. They are spending so much of their own money to equip themselves that it's totally ridiculous. It's like I said earlier, it's a shit situation for them.
Yeah, and a lot of them, there are issues with payment delays, or there's all sorts of. I mean, it's a country of war, so there's going to be some issues that are expected. But I know some of my guys. I was recently talking to a couple of them, and they were like, "Yeah, like in the beginning, they were buying like the best quality stuff, for themselves when they needed to replace it. But they've just been having to do so much of that and they just can't afford it anymore. So now it's just kind of more of the bare minimum. And so, right now, more recently, and some of this has to do with, Avdiivka and some larger attacks and along that in that area and down in the Zaporizhia area. Medicine has been one of the biggest things for us, and just very basic. We've all seen tourniquets, fundraisers for tourniquets, or kind of the same main things over and over. But some of the groups are needing even more of just basic, very, very, very basic items, which is hard to hear, when they can't afford it. And so they're relying, like Garrison was saying, some of my guys rely on Natasha, my Ukrainian partner, and I. If they don't get it from the two of us, then it comes out of pocket. If they can't pay for it, they don't get it
at all.
So that's right. Good question,
yeah,
Brian.
Just one quick follow up.
Yep.
At one point we were seeing a lot of Russian surrendering. Is that still a thing? Are you seeing Russians abandoning their positions and surrendering? I'm just curious if you're still taking people into custody.
Yeah, it's still a thing. That's been kind of consistent the entire war. Like every now and then you'll the videos happen where it's a whole lot of them. Usually what it is one or two guys at a time. We've had them before, in the middle of the night, they just kind of lay their rifle down and decide that they're done fighting. And they'll just walk up to the nearest Ukrainian position with their hands up. And the Ukrainians have a lot more thermal optics than the Russians. And so they can see them coming and they see that their hands are up. And obviously they approach that with caution, because the Russians do a lot of things that would be considered war crimes and try to, trick you into letting them get near you. And then, they've got a grenade in their hand or whatever. They'll play dead. There's a lot of perfidy. But yeah, they're still, they still give themselves up. Like I said, it's normally 1 and 2 guys at a time. Every now and then you get the big groups, but it's still kind of consistent. I think depending on the area, it's going to be kind of different, because there's not necessarily going to be opportunity to do that. But even in areas where there's not heavy fighting, it could just be the middle of the night and they'll come over and they'll tell the Ukrainians that I'm done fighting. Give me some food, give me some water. I'm done doing this shit. And usually that's when they're giving themselves up. It's not so much that they don't want to, die or something. It's that they're just tired a lot of times, but it's still happening.
Thank you. And yeah, get those fundraisers up, Paige. Let's get these guys what they need.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for mentioning that, Brian. It's the middle, up in the nest, the middle tweet that says, "Can you find the fella?" Go ahead and that's a picture of Garrison and his some of his guys um, and a fella in there somewhere. There's a link there through Protective Volunteer that you can donate to his team. Make sure that you select Frosty from the drop down menu. And I have a previous post, like 2 posts before that, where I also have his buy me a coffee. The reason why I didn't include it in this one is because for some reason, that first one didn't have a lot of visibility. As you guys know, sometimes certain things that you, that's just the beauty of social media. Certain things you include, I had a feeling maybe it was that link. I don't know. So that was limiting visibility. So, and I can provide that if you want to help him directly or what, it's all going to the same, like he needs help. He and his guys need help regardless. So definitely help out there. If you can't donate today, show the post some love, bookmark it, come back, share it again, keep an eye out. He's going to be on more spaces with myself and some others. Just any, like you guys usually do for me. I wouldn't be able to keep this up if it weren't for you guys doing that stuff for my fundraisers and projects and stuff. So just keep that up and with even a little bit more energy because he's over there in the thick of it. So yeah, and speaking of which, I'm going to be over there, not in the thick of, well, I might come quickly visit the thick of it to deliver stuff, but here pretty soon. So if it works out, then we might be able to do a quick little handshake and photo op over there, and I can hopefully bring him and his guys some of the medical stuff or some non-lethal supplies. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you guys for waiting. I know we've had a lot of hands. Go ahead, Doc.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks for doing the space. Garrison, thanks for coming on. It's really been awesome hearing from you. I'm a former corpsman attached to 1st Marines back in Desert Storm, so it's been a long, long time, and I'm really proud that you're over there doing this. Hoorah, brother! It's fantastic. I wish I wasn't as old as I was and could be there with you, but we're in good hands with people like you. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. My question was with the change of command at the commander chief level, and as that relates to mobilization. And I just am curious if you're noticing any changes that are happening yet, and why there's such a big issue with mobilization. I feel like if our country was under attack, there would be no question about what we would do. And so I just get the little bit of information that I get from Twitter versus what's going on inside Ukraine. And so I'm just a little bit curious about that. Thank you, brother.
So to address your question more specifically, are you asking about, like with the mobilization, you're asking about the number of, like the discrepancy between who wants to call however many people up, or like the, I know they were talking about lowering the draft age, or is it just kind of general?
No, it's more about the call up than the rotation. I can understand certainly the need for rotation and some of the things that this new commander is doing in terms of rotating units, but just the general feeling overall of, hey, you're under attack by an invading nation. Why isn't everybody lined up, ready to go?
That's kind of a difficult one to answer. I don't really know, to be honest with you. Most of I don't have a lot of opportunity to interact with Ukrainian civilians. The only time I ever do is in a store or at a shop or something like that. I know there's always been this kind of concern. Ukraine historically has had huge portions of their male population wiped out in the past, and it really wasn't even that long ago in some of those instances. And I know, at least with the draft age specifically, there was concern that if it was too low, they would accidentally kind of screw themselves 50 years down the road. And they were very much concerned about losing those guys that would ultimately go on and have families and everything else, that had not had the opportunity yet to have children. But as far as why more people aren't volunteering now compared to 2022, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it's difficult to expect anyone to kind of want to go out and get slammed with artillery. It's kind of strange. It's this running joke among a lot of the foreign volunteer fighters is, you know, a lot of us come from places that are far away. Like, yeah, the Europeans that come here, they're quite close. But when you start talking about coming from America or Canada, or in some cases, you know, places like New Zealand, it's a lot of travel to go through all that trouble to then sit in a trench and get pounded. And a lot of us, we have our various reasons why ideologically we want to do it, but you know, why we stomach it over and over again, I don't know. But it is a lot to ask for people. But to be honest, I'm not really sure why we don't have, you know, or why the Ukrainians don't have huge lines. In 2022, I mean, it would take them forever to get in because there were just so many people volunteering. But why that's changed, I'm really not sure, to be honest.
I recently met a former Marine also who's serving over there, Matthew Sampson. Are you familiar with him? Scout sniper?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, he was over here in the United States trying to fundraise and get in front of a bunch of different committees, and I just happened to bump into the guy and was pretty impressed. And I'm thinking about all the stuff you guys do, from actually fighting to joining these spaces to actually traveling back here. Sorry, they're putting a new roof on my house, so it's a little noisy, but traveling back here to fundraise. You know, it's just asking a whole hell of a lot. And I just wanted to say again, thank you very much. Really proud of you.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Doc. I didn't mean to laugh react just now. Sometimes I do that accidentally at inappropriate situations, inappropriate times. Uh, I I agree with you, Doc. I think that that's fantastic. Oh, he dropped. But yeah, no, I agree that there's a and and you know, we talked about this a little bit, Garrison, and I've talked about with other specifically American volunteers who are either fighting or over there running supplies or doing stuff. Can you guys hear me? Looks like a bunch of people are reconnecting, so I'm just making sure.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, just making sure. Anyway, there's I am I'm interested down the road in digging more into like the psychology behind all of this. Now, obviously it's different for fighting versus volunteering type stuff, but at the same time, there is a level like that's your expertise, and mine is more of logistics and nonprofit background and volunteerism. So it makes sense that you would go do that and I would go do this. But there's something that we have in common, and I want to figure that out because Ryan with Renegade Relief Runners is one of my personal friends. He's another one. There's just a lot of us that are there's just something I don't know. Maybe we're just crazy. I think there's a little bit of that in there. You have to be a little bit, but I'm really grateful to meet a lot of volunteers, and I actually have it. There's a guy from my town here in Kansas who is an Army vet who's over there doing something similar to what Garrison's doing, and it's an honor to know a lot of people who are willing to put others, especially those who I personally care a lot about, in before themselves. So, Jenny, go ahead.
Um, Hi, thank you. It's truly a pleasure to listen to any voices that come from Ukraine that are in Ukraine fighting for their freedom. And so thank you. Uh, my next my question is more, I have heard that the Ukrainian forces are in dire need of things like thermal underwear, and uniforms. Is this true?
Um, Thermal underwear, I don't know. I won't say no, you know, because that's very seasonally dependent. I think during winter, there's a lot of emphasis placed on some winter gear, but then there's kind of the ancillary stuff, such as like, you know, thermal underwear that I could see getting overlooked quite a bit because it's just not something people think about. As far as the uniforms go, I don't know that they're desperate for uniforms now, but it's also difficult to say because, like I was saying earlier, a lot of this stuff is personally purchased. So like my uniforms at this point are all MTAC because the stuff I came over here with in 2022 has since been destroyed or degraded or whatever. And the Ukrainians do a lot of that as well. MTAC, for those of you who don't know, is a Ukrainian company that makes tactical gear. And as far as I'm aware, they're like the largest one here, but they've been around for, I think they had started like 2014, 2015. But it's difficult to tell because it's difficult to tell who's been issued a uniform and who owns the uniform. So I don't know that I know enough about it to be able to answer that correctly. I think that, there is a Ukrainian uniform that gets issued. I do see that a lot as well, but I'm not seeing people running around in like civilian clothes or something like that. It's not like they're out there in jeans and a t-shirt, unless they want to be. I did meet a guy once and he loved it for whatever reason. But no, I mean, I don't think I'm seeing people without uniforms at all, but I don't know, who's purchasing their uniform and then who's being issued their uniform, to be honest.
The reason for my question is I have a lot of friends in the military, and I also have friends that do runs and they stock up um, ambulances. Sorry, I'm Swedish and it's kind of late, not as late as it is for you, but English is not my first language. This is my story. I'm going to stick to it. But I am kind of tired, so I have to think about my words. So I have friends who run ambulances down to the Polish border where they're taken over by Ukrainians, and they're kind of connected with the military. And so if I can tell them to kind of like, get uniforms and thermals and things like this, I will tell them to put that into the ambulances. And I just, before I did that, I kind of wanted to know, is this something that would be useful? Because otherwise it just takes up the space and that's just dumb.
I think it would be useful. And the reason I think it would be useful is, again, I think most of the Ukrainian soldiers are using their own money to purchase their own uniforms, which isn't, I mean, there's some pros to that because they can go out and get, exactly what fits or exactly what they want or whatever. But it is an additional cost to them. And, obviously people have different size families and various other bills and everything that they may have their own money going to. So yeah, they all might be getting paid the same, but their actual cost of living may differ. And so not everyone, I could see not everyone being able to necessarily afford it. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, honestly. And it's no problem with the second language and being tired. I'm tired as well. So
Yeah.
Speaking of which, well, yeah, we'll wrap up. We'll have just a couple more questions if that's okay, Garrison, because I know it is late.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Jenny, so Garrison's unit is a little more specialized than a lot of the guys that I help, who are some of the territorial defense units. I haven't heard the uniform issue yet. Doesn't mean that there's not certain brigades or units that aren't having that problem. And I would agree though with the thermals because yeah, the cost is part of it, but also it's still going to be cool. They're out there. If you're in trenches, even if it's kind of warmer when you're sitting outside for a long time in dirt, it's still nice to be a little bit more comfortable. But in worst case scenario, they'll be used in a few months because let's be honest, there's the likelihood that they're not going to be out there fighting when it gets a little cold again is pretty low. So I totally agree.
And I have to say that the Swedish thermals in the military are the best. I was lucky enough to live in a military town in northern Sweden, and I stocked up with the military stuff because I'm never cold. They're the best. And if I can like tell friends to steal some, can I happen to pack them down and send them to Ukraine, then that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, that's great. And we just celebrated St. Patrick's Day the other day, and I made a big deal out of my 96% or 95% Irish, but my other 4 or 5% is Swedish, and now I know why. I get it. I'm very proud of it. My Swedish heritage that I just learned about. So No, that's great. And I appreciate you doing that as well. That work. It's incredible how much the world has come together. Go ahead, Osra, and then we'll finish up with strategic, and then we'll say our little we'll do our little wrap up here. Osra, go ahead. Maybe I'm not saying that right. No, I think Osra. Can you hear me? Okay, we'll skip to strategic Jane. We'll come back if she comes.
Hi, thank you very much, Paige, and Garrison as well. This has been an interesting listen, and wow, what I know about how the United States military does their job, and I'm sure you, having been there, done that, you understand that, Garrison. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, how is it even possible that you should have to buy your own body armor? That's completely bonkers. But let me ask you a question, and it's a simple one. How I don't want to get too defense nerdy here, so I'm not going to. How does the fact that people are having to buy their own stuff impact them on a morale level? And secondly, can you say anything about what your unit does, sort of in a very vague way, even? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think from a morale standpoint, it just kind of contributes to the overall feeling of abandonment. It's kind of sad because a lot of times it feels like we get more support from the donor base than the countries, and I don't think that the donor base should have to exist in the first place. Like I've said a few times, so I think it does kind of contribute to that overall sense of abandonment. I know there's been several news reports with Ukrainians, and foreign volunteer fighters that kind of say that it feels like abandonment. So yeah, I definitely see that contributing to it. As far as what we do, so on paper, it's primarily reconnaissance and sabotage. The problem is that after 2022, during 2022, the lines were very fluid. You could kind of go in and bully the Russians. They weren't dug in. They hadn't been battle hardened. They didn't really know what the hell was going on. But once we got deeper and deeper into 2023, the lines were very much locked up. And so we didn't really have the opportunity to do reconnaissance anymore. But then even throughout all of this, we've primarily been used for spearheading assaults. So a lot of what we'll do is we'll go in and train individual elements of different Ukrainian units. And when they need to go on an assault, we'll not just be right next to them, but a lot of times we'll be right in front of them. We have a tendency to have a higher level of training, a higher level of skill set, just because we have military backgrounds, whereas a lot of the Ukrainians, whether they're a conscript or a volunteer, maybe a month ago they were a baker or worked in a factory or whatever. So they kind of allow us to kind of take the lead on that, which is really good for us, because I personally prefer going on assaults as compared to sitting in a trench and babysitting it and getting slammed with artillery as much as possible. So that's kind of what we're doing now. There's some other things we do, but that's, as far as this team is concerned, that's kind of become our bread and butter. And that's what we plan to stick with if we can.
Thank you guys for what you're doing. You, Paige, everybody. It is ridiculous that the U.S. government didn't have Ukraine its funding last fall. And thank you guys very much for what you're doing. Hopefully we can turn things around.
Thanks, Jane. All right, Osra, are you here with me? I saw you drop down. I'm giving you a second to get to your mic. Got 3 more seconds, and then I'm gonna have to move on. Because Garrison's tired. He's been fighting a war. I'm tired too. I'm tired too, but I've been sitting at a desk. So, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on. I'm sorry, Oscar. I just don't want to keep him around too much longer. It is midnight. In Ukraine. Sorry, I totally just lost my train of thought there. So thank you so much for coming here, Garrison or Frosty. If you guys see him on his, it says his handle is Frosty Ukraine at Frosty Ukraine. I really appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to talking with you more. I just enjoy speaking with you in general, but especially, one of my goals is to try to share as many Ukrainian stories and things, as much as possible with the rest of the world. So it's really important that you and people like yourself come on here who actually know what you're talking about and can really help shed some light on the reality, because it really is. It's one thing to even hear about it. It's one thing to hear about it from someone who's not there. It's another thing to hear about it from someone who is there, and it's an entirely different thing to see it in person and experience it. So you're one of the closest ways that we can get to that. So thank you for that. For everybody here, thank you guys so much for hanging out and listening. If you haven't already, give Garrison a follow and share his profile. He did previously have a profile on Twitter. Had to head out for a little while because there's a lot going on here. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming, and when you're trying to focus on fighting, it's a little much. So, and I feel that a lot myself. So let's help build his profile up a little bit, get him some more back to that solid following, and help him with his fundraising, the fundraiser posts that we have set up. I'll post some more too. This is just the first kind of one, is up in the nest. Can you find the fella? It's on my page as well. And you can donate through PayPal. I've had a couple people reach out to me, including Shaggy, who's one of my buds, who have already donated. So thank you, Shaggy, and thank you to everybody else who has helped as well. Really looking forward to speaking with you some more and continuing to try to showcase some Ukrainian voices and some volunteer voices that are over there to help educate and continue supporting Ukraine all together. Do you have anything else, Garrison?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I do appreciate this opportunity. I think it's good that we get to kind of come out and talk and stuff and share our opinions. I've done a number of interviews with like CNN and stuff, and those segments are pretty short, and obviously we can't curse, but a lot of times we don't really get to say what we want to say. And so these are, in my mind, extremely helpful because we get to kind of talk a lot more about the situation on the ground and the more specific details that you're not necessarily going to get from these snippets of video or reports in the news or on YouTube or whatever. So thank you all for listening, and thank you all who did donate for donating. I very much appreciate all of you guys. My team does, and all of the Ukrainian soldiers and foreign volunteer fighters do as well. We can't fight without you guys, and you're an enormous part of this war, even though maybe sometimes it doesn't feel like it. So I appreciate all of you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, ladies. We're going to wrap it up. We'll do another space soon. Keep an eye out. You guys can come ask all the questions. Send them to me before, during, after. We'll have plenty of time. I know it's super interesting. So I appreciate you all. Thank you, Garrison. Go get some rest. I hope you get to sleep through the night and are not woken up by the terrorist state of Russia. So sweet dreams.
Thanks, Paige. You too. Whenever Kansas goes to sleep in its cornfields.
All right. Bye. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now.
Bye, Paige.